Next news at 9, breaking news as it happens. Chicago's Morning Answer continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
From the Matrix Home Solutions studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, and your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com. Get your tickets for Biden, the first 100 days, on March 20th. Tickets are on sale now at 560theanswer.com/Biden.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. Just one more comment on that eighth grader from Naperville we played before Mike Scott's newscast. I want to also compliment his parents, Jay Deegan's parents, for raising such a thoughtful and brave kid, because I know that is not the product of the schools in Naperville.
Right, and you have to be brave to do what he did. There's no doubt. And the great thing about his bravery is how sharply it contrasts from the abject cowardice of so many of those suburban parents. You know who I'm talking about when I say you are pathetic and embarrassing, and your conduct has been shameful. Shameful. And if anybody has the guts to call in and discuss that, who disagrees with me, please do. I will give you the floor. But I know that's unlikely to be the case because of what I just described being accurate. Switching gears, we're pleased to be joined now by George Parry, former federal and state prosecutor out of Philadelphia, blogs at knowledgeisgood.net. And if you thought things were locked down in D.C., if you thought that looked like a militarized zone, you should see the area around the Hennepin County Courthouse in Minnesota in advance of jury selection and the Derek Chauvin trial, which jury selection begins next week. George, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Great to be with you.
So tell us a little bit about what you anticipate in the Derek Chauvin trial. And again, for those who've forgotten, this is the officer who had his knee on the neck of George Floyd and is on trial for murder.
Well, right now, according to news reports, the area around the Hennepin County Courthouse looks like a war zone. They've erected parallel barriers, concrete barriers topped with fencing with razor wire in between, all around the Hennepin County Courthouse. They fortified the county jail, which is several blocks away, and they're fortifying police precincts throughout the city, and they've got the Minnesota National Guard coming in to conduct patrols to provide a presence and a deterrence, in the words of officialdom, in key business corridors. And there are other preparations that are going on there. The city is hiring so-called influencers to quell rumors about the trial and so forth and so on. All of this in anticipation of the trial of former officer Derek Chauvin, who is scheduled for jury selection on March 8th. And the mayor has said that the obvious flashpoint in all of this will be around the time of deliberations and the jury verdict. And what the mayor is anticipating, and correctly anticipating, is if there is an acquittal of Officer Chauvin, Minneapolis is going to explode. And the point that I made in my article in the American Spectator is, under these circumstances, how in the world can a fair and impartial and unintimidated jury be selected in Hennepin County to hear the case of Derek Chauvin, when they know, when anybody on that jury knows that they vote for an acquittal, the whole city is going to blow up, and any juror voting for acquittal is going to become a target of the very same mob violence. So,
well, it won't just be that city either.
It's going to be the whole country. It'll be Chicago again. It'll be New York. It'll be L.A. So there's a lot of pressure. Now, didn't his defense attorneys try to get the trial moved out of Hennepin County?
Yeah, and what's happened, that motion for change of venue so far has been denied, but I can tell you, just based on my own experience in dealing with messy cases like this, what could very well happen here is they'll try and pick a jury, and if they can't get a jury, because in highly contentious cases like this, the tendency is people will just say, look, I don't want to be on the jury. I can't be fair. The judge will then grant the change of venue to a remote location where they stand a better chance of finding jurors. But right now, the case is going forward in Hennepin County, and according to the local news media, the city of Minneapolis looks like a war zone right now. So that's where we're at.
And I want to be clear. Obviously, you're a former federal and state prosecutor, so obviously this is not a defense of Derek Chauvin you're offering. This is a desire to see, our justice system work. And if you can't impanel an objective jury, then our justice system isn't working the way it's intended to. That's the concern here. It's not a concern over Derek Chauvin's guilt or innocence. It's a concern over a fair trial.
Well, it's concern over a fair trial, but make no mistake, I have reviewed the evidence in this case, and I've written a number of articles about it. And I'm telling you right now, Derek Chauvin, none of those police officers, including Derek Chauvin, caused the death of George Floyd. And one of the most telling things that's happened in the lead up to this trial is the defense moved to have the trial televised, and the prosecution has vigorously opposed that motion. The judge granted the motion, and the prosecution asked the judge to reconsider his decision, which raises the question of why doesn't the prosecution want the world to see the evidence as it is developed in the courtroom? And my take on it is because once all of the evidence comes out, not just the highly edited and selective video that everybody has seen, when all of the evidence comes out, it's going to become perfectly clear that Chauvin and the other officers did not kill George Floyd.
What was the cause of death?
Yeah, lay out your case.
What did the ME report say?
The cause of death comes down to this. If you look at the whole video, not just the stuff that's been broadcast, Floyd begins shouting that he can't breathe while he's still upright and mobile. Before he's on the ground, he's saying, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. And the police treated him with a great deal of consideration. They're trying to get him into the patrol car. And he's saying, he's basically, I'm claustrophobic. I'll die in there. Don't put me in the car. So they're saying things to him like, we'll roll down the window. We'll turn on the air conditioning. I mean, I compare that to the Philly cops of 30 years ago. They just would have hit him over the head and thrown him in a wagon. But these guys are being very solicitous. So then you get to the cause of death. He couldn't breathe while he was still standing up. He was upright and mobile because, as they found at autopsy, his lungs were filled with fluid. And why were his lungs filled with fluid? Because he had taken a massive overdose of fentanyl. And fentanyl causes pulmonary edema, which is fluid in the lungs, and it also suppresses respiration. So Floyd expires while he's on the ground. How did he get to be on the ground? Because he asked to be put on the ground. And Derek Chauvin's knee on the side of his neck did not occlude his airway, and the Hennepin County medical examiner has told the FBI, in another piece of evidence that was hidden by the prosecution until recently, when he was interviewed by the FBI, the Hennepin County medical examiner said Chauvin did not occlude Floyd's airway by kneeling on the side of his neck. I mean, I could go into all the weeds of this, but those are the basic facts. What killed Floyd was a drug overdose that caused his lungs to fill up with fluid.
And he also had COVID.
And there's no and the question though of Derek Chauvin having the knee on the neck for some 8 minutes, that's not an open question in your mind in terms of that being a contributing factor even with that underlying condition?
It's going to be a factor because my good friend, Dr. Michael Baden, the celebrity pathologist, former chief medical examiner of the city of New York, is going to testify that kneeling on the side of the neck impeded the flow of blood to the brain. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be an open issue. And what's going to happen at the trial, though, is you're basically going to have dueling medical examiners. You're going to have the Hennepin County medical examiner saying, as he said in the FBI report, what killed Floyd was his bad heart, his poor health situation, and the struggle that he had with the police before he was on the ground. I mean, that's in his FBI 302.
But
Biden is going to testify that once he was on the ground, when Chauvin is kneeling on the side of his neck, that occluded the flow of blood through the carotid arteries to Floyd's brain. And I think that's a very problematic take on the thing. But look, I have to, in the interest of full disclosure, I've known Dr. Biden for 35 years. We're actually friends. I've used him as a witness in both my prosecution and defense cases. He's a terrific witness, and he's a very smart man. So there's going to be that issue in the case.
Well, right, and it seems to me, if I'm a prosecutor, I argue that at minimum, Chauvin violated police procedure. He was not attendant to George Floyd when he was still protesting while he was essentially docile with his knee on his neck. And that showed a reckless disregard for human life. And so there's your at least second-degree murder conviction.
Well, you can make that argument, but one of the ironies here is that the knee on the side of the neck was an approved restraint that was taught at the Minneapolis Police Academy for many years. They stopped using it before Floyd's death, but the fact of the matter is, if you look in the training materials that were still being used at the time of Floyd's death, they got a picture of a cop kneeling on the side of someone's neck. I mean, that was an approved technique that undoubtedly Chauvin learned that at the police academy. It wasn't something he invented on the scene. So you've got that issue.
But you still have the issue of, as you said, he's George Floyd saying, "I can't breathe," while they're trying to get him into the squad car initially, and then he's still saying it when he's on the ground. And so a prosecutor would argue, well, you were notified essentially by the person you were trying to detain that he was having trouble breathing. You were trying to call a paramedic for a medical response, and then you have him on the ground. So you reasonably should have known that that extended period of time with a knee on your neck could cause injury, if not death. And so again, you get back to the same place. If I'm the prosecutor arguing on behalf of the state.
Oh yeah, look, I can make out the prosecution case, but what I'm saying is there is reasonable doubt based on the physical evidence and the the full video record. There is certainly reasonable doubt as to whether or not the police caused the death of George Floyd, and it's the burden of the prosecution to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
But the main point of my article was that before a fair and impartial jury, Derek Chauvin's got more than a fighting chance of an acquittal. But they're not going to be able to find a fair and impartial jury in Hennepin County, and certainly they're not going to be able to find a fair and impartial jury that is unintimidated and free of the fear of mob retaliation against the jury itself or the jurors who vote for acquittal. So the best they could do under these circumstances, it seems to me, is to get this case out of Hennepin County, which has already had a great deal of rioting and disruption in the immediate wake of Floyd's death, and is now preparing for World War III in the event that there's an acquittal. They need to get the case out of there and get it to one of the outlying counties that hasn't previously been destroyed by rioting and the kind of mob intimidation that has been going on in Hennepin County ever since Floyd's death.
Although if they
may not want to take it.
If they had it outside Hennepin County, and he was acquitted outside of Hennepin County, that would inflame the passions perhaps even more, wouldn't it? Saying, you took it out of Hennepin County to get him acquitted rather than have him be tried in the jurisdiction in which the alleged crime occurred.
Look, whatever happens here, all I can tell you is whatever happens, if there is an acquittal, there's going to be an explosion. There's going to be an explosion, and it's going to this will all continue to be exploited by Black Lives Matter and Antifa and whoever else as part of their anti-police narrative. But just viewing it as a trial advocate, the lawyers representing Derek Chauvin, they have to be concerned with the interest of their client, and I think that they're fully justified in arguing that there is reasonable doubt in this case, and that it really needs to be heard by a fair, impartial, and unintimidated jury somewhere else outside of Hennepin County.
He is George Parry, former federal and state prosecutor. He blogs at knowledgeisgood.net. George,